Great.
Welcome to the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board of Education meeting. This is a workshop. We want to let the public know that we are video recording this meeting. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel. So first we'll start with call to order.
Start.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Hi, I'm Susanna Ordway and I represent Area 4.
Laura Bratt representing Area 3.
Shelley Clark representing Area 2.
Jesse Van Zee representing Area 1.
Rachel Hurd representing Area 5.
Thank you. And we'll next do the Pledge of Allegiance.
States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. So next we'll move on to the acceptance of a workshop agenda. Can I get a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
Seconded.
The motion was made by Board Member Hurd and seconded by Board Member Van Zee. Roll call vote. Board Member Hurd.
Aye.
Board Member Van Zee.
Aye.
Board Member Ordway.
Aye.
Board Member Clark.
Aye.
Board Member Bratt.
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Great. Next, we move on to 4.0. So 4.1 Board Workshop 4.1 Stewardship of Resources, Maintaining Reserves. So that would be Assistant Superintendent of Business Operations Telekemp.
Yes, good evening, trustees. Thank you for joining us today for this study session on the budget, the district's budget for the 24-25 school year. Before we start, I want to just thank Evan Miller. I have two Evans now, so Evan Miller and Christine Wardo and Melanie Jones for helping to prepare and bring together the recommendations that we'll be providing to you later on during the presentation. We're holding this board study session because the board has directed staff to identify cuts for the 24-25 school year. And we want to be as transparent as possible with this full school community regarding what our recommended cuts will be. So with that, tonight we want to talk about our budget assumptions and challenges. We want to share with the guiding principles that we've used to arrive at these expenditure reductions that we will cover. And then the board will engage in a discussion. And we want to also share with you some future year considerations with the budget as we move forward. And then in the discussion, we'd like the board to consider the proposed reductions. Also provide other considerations, cuts, and revenue generation recommendations. You might have some ideas. We want to hear what those are. And then we would love to finish the board discussion with thoughts on community outreach that might be necessary in light of the reductions that will be coming forward. So I want to start by really thinking about the resources that we have in the district. Not all of our resources are monetary. How we use time is a resource that can be adjusted that could have an impact though on the fiscal world of this school district. Of course, personnel and staffing levels, but organizational efficiency is a big area that we've focused on in these particular recommendations. And then facility use and design. I think that's a big piece that we often forget about when we're considering possible reductions. Before we start, though, I want to go over a few definitions because there is a little confusion out there regarding our funding. So I wanted just to share, and Evan helped me put this together. I said, we have to explain this in a way that's not an accountant's language for the funding, because right now we're in a unique situation in funding California schools, and I'll get into that uniqueness in just a minute. So when we think about the funding formulas, they always start with the previous year's base funding. So for 24-25, we look at 23-24, and we take that base funding, let's say it's $11,000, and we multiply it by the COLA, which in this case is 0.76%, and that gives us the 24-25 base funding. This new base funding is then multiplied by this thing called the funded ADA. Now, back before COVID, the funded ADA was 1 year ADA. So it would have been like 95% or 95.5 or 97%. In this case, San Ramon Valley had really high ADA, and that would be your new LCFF allocation. And an ADA is really related to the number of days a student is present in school. So if a student misses half the school year, we get only a half an ADA for that particular student. So it's super complicated formula. The interesting thing that's happened is that during COVID, we had ADA above 100%. And the state allowed school districts to take advantage of a new formula for calculating funded ADA, which was an average over 3 years. And so this average over 3 years is why sometimes you look at the funded ADA for a grade level span and it's higher than the number of students enrolled because we're using that 3-year average. That 3-year average is starting to change now that the COVID years are falling off the 3-year average. We're going to be looking at our true ADA and it will get closer to the 95, 96, 97%. So this is one of the things to keep in mind as we look out in the next few
Can I
years.
ask you a clarifying question in what you just said? So that would imply that ADA is also a number, not a percentage in the way it trickles from year to year. Is that correct?
It's
Because otherwise it couldn't be more than 100%, right?
right.
Okay.
Yes. In this, yes, yes.
I mean, I think it's really important that we're clear about that because we've always talked about ADA only as a percentage, but it drives home the fact that you can't have this discussion
Right.
about declining enrollment in percentages. You need to talk numbers and dollars.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes. And I think it's also interesting is the when you have your student population as your enrollment is declining, that is an additional factor, right? That is additional factor because you're taking your base allocation, your funded ADA, as that's declining, those numbers start to inflate and impact the budget quite a bit. Okay. Which one to look at? Okay, so I wanted to show you also, this comes from school services. They've already shared the new LCFF funding factors for the next school year. And you can see that so the adjusted base grant, which is about third line down, 24-25 base grant per ADA for TK through 3 is 99.94. And you can see how the numbers go up to high school 12,106. Those are also adjusted slightly for different grade level spans. And then you can see the total with the grade level spans. So TK through 3 is about 11,000 and then high school is about 12,400. The supplemental concentration grants, we're not going to talk about those today because it's not pertinent to this conversation. Okay, so I wanted to create a slide also to show you sort of in summary what this looks like. The top 2 lines outline the 24-25 LCFF per ADA funding. So it's on average, again, 11,620, kind of all wrapped together. We project a district ADA, funded ADA. So our enrollment might be a little higher or lower, but the funded ADA is about 28,400 students. 0.86, I don't know where that is, but 0.86. That's why the number's off, right? So it looks like the revenue next year is about $330,458,000. Compared to this year, you'll notice that the LCFF funding was about 11.5. Our enrollment, funded ADA enrollment, 29,300, and our LCFF revenue was $337 million. So you can see already there's a $7 million difference due to declining enrollment. It's all due to declining enrollment. Yes, yes. So I think the last line, look at the last paragraph there where it talks about even though there is a 0.76% projected COLA because of the declining enrollment and our 3 prior year average daily attendance rate, the district is anticipating a decrease in revenue, state revenue of 2%.
Well, because we're doing the 3-year average, does this problem get worse as in the following year and then again in the following year because we're taking advantage of the because we're not really counting actual ADA during the COVID years.
Right.
And then as soon as that starts falling off, it
Right.
precipitates. Okay.
This is why the initiative to have the attendance TOSA and get the letters and the promotion to, have children attend school. And the nice thing about this is in the governor's trailer bill, or in the trailer bill, the legislative trailer bill with the budget, is that it's going to allow us to do some things creatively to recoup attendance beginning next year. So we're going to work on that as a project. Okay, so we also need to think about what our assumptions are and our challenges are as we move forward. And many of these things I've already talked about, but attracting and retaining highly qualified staff is a priority. These are teachers, administrators, classified staff, people that we bring into the district and that we train. We want them to stay with us as much as we can. And so part of that is salary, part of that is, making sure we have positions for them and that we're being able to be creative about that. We can say for a fact that that the base funding and the supplemental funding do not fulfill the program requirements here in the district. We know that our local funds are set to expire, and that's why we went out for an early renewal and for the supplement that the community is now considering. Cost escalations are not aligned with the additional state revenues. So these escalations are not in line with the new COLA, and this is a challenge we have to address. And then we also have to maintain minimum reserves. That's very important for us to meet those financial obligations. So you did this resolution for us, and so now we're going to talk about how we arrived at the recommendations regarding reductions. So we have 4 guiding principles. The first one really is around how can we address efficiencies operationally to maximize our resources. So that's an important thing to think about because, when you have a $430 million budget, there's $10 million in that budget that you can find. We know that, but we need to identify the $10 million that are things that are redundant. We have duplication. Maybe they're not being utilized to the maximum capacity, or we're continuing to spend on something that maybe we don't need anymore. So I've asked all the departments to take a look at that and come back with some recommendations. We also want to make sure that our expenditures are aligned with our strategic directions. So meaning that we're not spending money on something that is not of value to the board and the community. Considering delaying and eliminating some big ticket purchases in the near future. And then our most important is to keep cuts as far away from the classroom as we possibly can. All right, so with this, now Christine's going to step in and help a little bit. So this is the first set of proposed general fund restrictions. Actually, this is the whole set of general fund restrictions that of general fund reductions that we've identified. So the very first one is related to district departments and general fund allocations that our departments have here at the district office. And so we know that there was always money that's left on the table at the end of the year, and we believe that we can sweep about 5% of that, so reduce the allocation going into next year, which will realize almost $1 million in reductions. Okay, all right, Christine, you're up for the next bit.
Thank you. Educational services on this line item is really looking specifically at our usage of thought exchange. We've also included in here some dollars that we had reserved for professional development for staff across the district, in addition to our subs contract, which is our Speak Up, Be Safe contract that we run with our 2nd, 4th, and 6th graders through the Child Prevention Council, looking at proposing to reduce that and absorbing some of that through the resources that we have with our counselors and support providers on the ground. Up next, we have special education, which is also under my umbrella. Here, we are looking at some reductions to our infant program up at Hidden Hills and serving our students to the letter of the law. Some removal of a reduction of a rider over our adult transition program. We're looking at our non-public agency support, and we're also looking at bringing back 2 students from an outside county program back to the district. And that kind of encompasses those 2 items. And I have members of our team here today if you have further details regarding those topics.
So for technology, the director of technology has identified about 225 million, 25 million,
Oh.
225,000. Good job, Kelly. And these really fall in redundancies. So software redundancies that we have in the district, we might have 2 systems running that serve the same purpose. And one of the things that happens very often when you do a software adoption is that one of the vendors might pick up, add some features to their product that then, takes away the need to have the second product. So she's looking at that right now and has identified about $225,000 there. We currently have a district duplication department, and the department falls under Zeta and Evan. And we're working right now to eliminate the department. It will take a little bit of time to do this because the duplication services largely are cyclical. So there are different times of the year we have duplication needs. So we're working out the changes that are necessary there in that department in order to be able to better utilize the staff there and reduce our contract for the duplicating center. So a lot of things are online now. We have textbook adoptions that have printed materials that we can get directly from the vendor and so on.
Do you want us to wait until you're finished going through it for asking questions? Like what would be marked?
Whatever's convenient is fine.
No, okay. On the duplication department,
Mhm.
is that a complete offset or like, are we eliminating that from our budget? Or are we moving it over into another category? Is that number completely represent that?
That number represents the total cost of the duplication department. As a result, we have been negotiating with CSEA about what to do with that department. And so this does not, we just wrapped those negotiations on Friday.
Okay.
So this does not reflect the actual cost for what we settled on with CSEA last week. And we know there will be some additional expenditures, but the duplication department charges back for sites or departments. And so the district did subsidize at about a cost of $200,000 a year. So I'd say that $82,000 might still be spent in the upcoming year as the district or as sites and departments look to external places to fill their duplicating needs.
Okay, so, but you, okay. Never mind.
So I mean, I would say about all these numbers is they are all budget, right? They are all things that we have budgeted, but actuals will always come in at a different
They're
amount.
actual, yeah.
And is it reasonable to assume that the 82,000 that you're saying would come back to the sites would actually be more than that? Because that's getting it at cost as opposed to having to outsource it. Somebody's going to be making profit.
So we've started to reach out to some local printing shops already, and we will do an RFP in the upcoming months. And we believe that we'll be able to get some volume discounts, but we aren't able to really cost that out, I think, until after we
Right,
complete
sure,
that
until you
process.
know.
So.
Okay.
Okay, instructional software.
Yes, thank you. Our department as well. So we took a look at a bank of all the software that we use across the district. And we, in partnership with our tech department, really looked at tools that are redundant or tools that we could use that could come at no cost. And so we were able to really kind of allocate a pot of money that with the support of our curriculum reps, we want to go back out to our teachers and really take a look at those tools individually, really further evaluate where we do see the redundancy, where we do see newer tools that could possibly take the place. And we believe we have roughly close to 1.123 million to be able to do that. And so that's why we've allocated that pot of money towards that. Next, we have our textbook adoptions. And so what we did was take a look at kind of the next 3 years and the cycles that we're currently in and adopting, and then the materials that we're looking to the future to adopt. Our current pilots that we ran this year, which were specific to world language, 3rd grade English language arts, K-12 EL curriculum, we would proceed with purchasing. And then going forward, we would really shift over to slowing down our adoptions in the upcoming years. And we can talk a little bit in detail about what that would look like and how that impact might kind of further impact like our history, our social studies adoptions that we were looking to in the next year or two.
Kelly, do you want to talk about the one-to-one device? Come on up.
We were also looking at the one-to-one device initiative. We've had some conversations with curriculum and we're having some conversations with tech advisory committee and such to make sure that we are being efficient in our purchases of devices as well. So we were looking at two shifts in those programs. One is to extend the use of the devices. Currently, we have second grade through 12th grade getting Chromebooks that they keep for 5 years. And so instead of keeping them for 5 years, they would be in circulation for 7 years within our system. We collaborated with some other school districts, look at their budgeting plans. Google has been able to extend their software updates now up to 10 years on the new Chromebook. So that is also allowing us to look at that as a way to shift the system, if you will, and save money each year. The other thing that that would look like is that we would be looking at the refresh still occurring in 8th grade for 8th graders. So they would get a new Chromebook in 8th grade from 8th grade to 12th grade. But we would be collecting the 12th grade Chromebooks that are have been in use for 5 years. We would clean them up over the summer and put them back into circulation in 6th grade. So 6th graders would be onboarded with devices for 6th and 7th grade. And the purpose for that is because we're also looking at repair replacement costs. And the biggest place where that happens is in middle school. So working with those students and that population on a more systemic onboarding approach to taking care of the device and then utilizing it in that way. That will also save us money as well, doing both of those things. The second thing that we're looking at is our one-to-one program in TK through 1st grade. We've been considering, based on input here, taking what we have now in our one-to-one classrooms and looking at the model where it's not used all the time one-to-one, it's used more like a center model for those age groups. So what we were considering is that at the end of this year, we would take the iPads back into our possession that we have that are one-to-one. We can resell those and get some money back into our pockets and use that to buy brand new iPads, but then push those back into the classrooms at 8 or so per classroom rather than one-to-one so that they have not one-to-one, but centers up to 1st grade on iPads. And those devices would also be in the 7-year refresh plan. So that is where we came up with that number.
Can I ask a question? So the way that we used to do one-to-one was that most of the devices were paid for from outside funding from parent organizations or booster groups. And when COVID came, that kind of all got changed and some of the funds went away. So first of all, you're leaving money in the budget for replacement of devices that get broken or you can't fix or whatever, correct?
We're leaving money in the budget, but we're also looking at implementing, like we do with textbooks, people being able to replace, like when they need a new one. Right now, currently, if there's a repair or replacement needed, students submit tickets and they get a new one. And some of them have done that 2 or 3 times. And that's been really costly as well. So we're looking at making that more like a textbook replacement. And then also making sure they have something for learning each day, which is.
So are we looking at having people, students, if they want to bring their own device? Are we encouraging that, or are we saying everybody has to have? Because when we first started, you could bring your own, or you could get them from
Yes.
school.
Yeah,
right?
thank you for asking that question. We have looked at that. The challenge is that the systems that we have in place are not going to be operating in the same way if students are bringing in their home with their own Chromebooks. So this was our first attempt at trying to save money without moving into that model. Here's what I mean by that. We have a system called Securely, as you've heard of, where classroom teachers, mostly in secondary, monitor student classroom use. And you can't do that when they're not all on the systems that we've been creating and operating together. So that would impact the classroom more. And that has been something that we were concerned about shifting. But we are open to all ideas, but that is one example.
So have we thought about partnering with booster groups again? Maybe not asking them to, the parent community, to bear the whole cost of devices, but to get maybe to a place where they would partner with us or contribute to technology again?
If we feel like we need to do that, we definitely have, we have not explored that at this time.
Okay.
That's part of a bigger conversation that needs a lot more heavy lifting, and it's not just about technology. It's about where are the gap areas, technology being one of them. How are dollars presently being used? What role the principal plays in that process? How we support them to work with our parent leaders who've done all the heavy lifting to raise the money. That's a part of a next piece of work that has to be on the table.
And I would add that I kind of think once something's become district funded, if we feel like it's still important, it sends the absolute backwards message to be saying, because when you put it back to the site, it now is optional until we work out the other things that you were saying, John.
If I can just highlight one thing Kelly said, because being the person who needs a lot of help understanding this world, when Chromebook's lifespan was made better, that helps us in this short-term period. So once you can help me understand that they've helped us keep our machines working effectively, and then we can see where this goes. But I really think we should be careful about shifting course too quickly, because the other piece is also around instructional practice. And though it may be that we can move quicker because the world is changing rapidly to places where our systems bring all the devices together, we still have to navigate the fact that there are many educators that are still intimidated sometimes about all the different things that are out there. And our job is to make it as seamless and as simple as possible. So it's one step at a time, but this strategy, at least when it was explained to me, and I trust Kelly very much, we're not harming anything at the moment. Now, 2 years from now, depending upon how finances work, there may be some other difficult decisions that need to be made. But for right now, this looks like a sustainable path with the information that we have.
I have a clarifying question. So when you talk about treating the one-to-one devices in the same way that we treat textbooks, so that means checking them out and then having a fine if they break and then replacing them if they're lost?
Yes.
And that's okay. And that's
Two things we would need to work on for this year. One would be collecting the iPads at the TK1 level and then doing that over the summer. Two would be fifth grade right now takes their Chromebooks home over the summer, and then they have them going into middle school. So we would want to work with fifth grade teachers and principals and have those stay in the classroom. That way there's just no devices going home unless they've been checked out, at the elementary level. And then onboarding sixth graders with with their new device and a new, like we talked at the board meeting last week about the agreement that we're working on for acceptable use becoming responsible use. But that part of that would also be the agreement that you've been issued a Chromebook, and if it's lost or stolen or needs replacement, this would be the pricing for it.
One question about that, Kelly. So what do you do in that case where the parent says, well, I don't I don't want to accept responsibility for this. I'd rather just buy my own device versus have to check this one out.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we would definitely need to explore that.
Cross that bridge when we get
yeah.
to it. Okay.
The trouble with right now, the way things are with outside devices is all the safety that people appreciate that we put into place. I can't guarantee that same safety when people bring in their own devices. So we did have a time when we did that, but we didn't have the same parameters that we do now in keeping our kids safe online.
And even some of the school districts that had BYOD programs before, like Napa Valley, which was very famous for their BYOD, has moved away from that now that we have more systems in place to ensure student safety, online safety.
When we started BYOD at San Ramon High School, which is the first high school to have it, the Chromebooks didn't last very long. So I'm glad to hear that Google's been able to help us extend the life of those, because we were replacing all the time, and we had an ed fund that was, a technology fund that was contributing money all the time. So that is very helpful. The only thing for me is that if we get to a place where we have to make severe cuts in other places, that's when I think we have to think about if there's outside funding that we can get, whether it's grant funding or I don't know. I mean, I'm willing to explore that part. I understand the reasoning around not, going backwards with parents and saying now you need to pay for them when you didn't need to, but I mean, I wouldn't take that completely off the table at any point.
Great. One other just like piece of information to bring to the conversation is that we had internally was how to manage, AP testing and CASP testing with the software push out that we do in order to manage such the operation that we have. So we did have conversations with the curriculum team as well to explore different age levels that it would least impact for that. We are going to be creative with all of it. This was just our beginning place where we thought we could probably make these shifts and not have too much impact at this time.
Okay, so moving along, we have about $150,000 cut in the superintendents and communications offices, and these are really contracts that we have in place with different advisor groups, membership to insert. Nichols and Valaire are two contractors that we're using for communication support. So that's one piece. And then for travel and conferences, we'd like to move all travel and conferences out of unrestricted and utilize any restricted dollars that we might have left through the educator effectiveness grant and so on. So those are the reductions in the unrestricted. I want to talk now a little bit about the restricted. So we currently have the liaisons and a TOSA funded from the district level that we've identified. The liaisons were funded from one-time dollars that we were able to extend 1 year, but we aren't able to extend it for the 4th year. So we had those in place for 3 years. And we've met with the principals and we've met with the liaisons to talk about this this morning. The district level staffing position is one that Ed Services has made a decision. I think they've already talked with a staff member about that. Can I say which one it is? Okay, I think so. It's Equity TOSA. So that's that position. All right. So the third kind of piece of the funding reductions is shifting funding. So what we'd like to do next year is to shift the elementary counselors into restricted and hold them there for a bit until we have some the budget changes a bit. With district level staffing, this is another TOSA that we want to fund out of educator effectiveness dollars. And then we have a staff member that's partially funded out of unrestricted that we can move over to our routine restricted maintenance budget. So those are the adjustments that we'd like to make, and that's sort of how we get to the magical number that I'm going to show you in just a minute of the changes that. And I'm happy to give you guys those slides if you want to have a copy of the slides.
Please,
all
that
of
is
these are
grateful.
Yes.
Can I ask about the slide before this about the liaisons?
Mhm.
So, does this budget include or not include the potential parcel tax, the supplemental parcel tax? funding?
It does not.
Okay, so in theory, best world, potentially the supplemental parcel tax would then be able to refund the liaisons, the MTSS liaisons, or am I jumping to conclusions?
Not necessarily, because if you go to the next slide, Stella, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what moving elementary counselors for a period of time is with the hope that more dollars are going to come in so that we can actually pay for other things that we don't have funding sources for down the road, such as elementary counselors. So we will leave it today to say, and when we met with principals last week and today, we accept that we need to provide better supports for our elementary schools, especially those that do not have admin support like an assistant principal. We need to make some decisions. This gets into the other legal realities based upon March 15th. As things unfold later in the year or in the near future, we've placed it as a priority that how we support schools has to become number one, next to how we support kids' academic and social emotional well-being. So that's why it's too premature to say, well, if we get that, we'll just bring all of this back, because as this budget makes its way to the bottom line, there's going to be other nuances to it as well. But leave it for today to say, we only have so many dollars right now prior to parcel taxes, whether they're approved or not. And then we needed to prioritize kind of what we're bringing before you. And we're not in a position where we can say, well, if we get that, then those are the following 10 things we're going to immediately bring back. But we're committed to a process with academic and social emotional support and supports to schools, especially those that are very lean, as being the top. Is that? Yep. Okay.
And also just to clarify, so the 28 FTE and the 4.2 million, that's encompasses only salary, the total compensation and more of it.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. So if you add up everything that we have discussed, we have found over $10 million of potential reductions. That being said, there's a little bit more to the story. We know we will have some potential increases. So we know that utility costs are going up. I mean, everybody who's gotten a PG Neville knows. Fuel costs for our buses has gone up. We anticipate insurance, so property liability and workman's comp insurance rates, pension obligations, health and welfare benefits. We have our labor agreements that we just settled, so we're finishing those up. But they've already been calculated into what we know, yes, and then the site support. So that Dr. Malloy just spoke about, like we know we need to give some support to our school sites. What that looks like, we don't know yet. We have some ideas that we're playing with. We have some proposals. That the sites that if the funding comes out better than we anticipate right now, that without going into the parcel tax revenue, that we would identify the schools that currently do not have an assistant principal to put a shared admin TOSA at those sites and have them share an admin TOSA. So that would be 6 admin TOSAs that we'd like to bring back to support the principals. So, but I have more reductions I haven't shown you yet. And then of course the further, if the COLA comes in at 0. So I'm going to show you some ideas that I have for some revenue generation. Well, and reductions, I guess. So if we can increase our ADA next year through attendance recovery, so we have a really good plan. We can use our ELOP dollars, we hope, because it's in the trailer bill, use the ELOP dollars to create an attendance recovery system that'll allow us to recoup attendance. We can get it up to 97, 98. That would be great. We need to look at our contracted services, particularly special education transportation. Right now, we're spending several $1,000,000 a year on transportation services with the vendors who are driving our children to various non-public schools or even in the district. And we have a bunch of buses that are sitting over at Monte Vista that we can bring back into service. They were parked there because we didn't have enough bus drivers. After the pandemic, didn't have drivers. Now our new director is hiring drivers. We expect by the end of the year to have 8 to 10 drivers. We have 12 buses parked there. So that would bring back a number of routes to the district. Energy efficiency. So adhering to the energy guidelines, we maybe need to go through and we need to audit, and we'll work on a plan for that. I think the most exciting piece around this is our natural gas procurement. So because we're a large agency, at your home, when you get PG&E gas, you don't have a choice of who you procure your gas from. It is PG&E. But school districts can actually buy the gas commodity through a third party. It's then goes into our PG&E bill, and we have our Spur is our current firm that provides the gas commodity. They're no longer carrying that. We have found and have cut a deal with another company. We'll be bringing the contract. Actually, I'll share it with you. We're paying about half of what we are currently paying to PG&E. So that will be a nice reduction that could bring some more dollars back into the budget. So we'll buy the gas on a set fee. And if it goes up, we pay the set fee. If it goes down, that's the risk we're taking as we're paying. But it'll help Evan with the budget. And we'll know what our gas procurement bill will be. But I'm always open to other ideas and suggestions that you might have for us, the ways that we can recoup some dollars. I think the good news here is that our child nutrition program is running a positive balance. So they're bringing in more revenue than they're expending. So we don't have to supplement that program. Special education costs are always one that we're trying to adjust and make sure we keep those under control because they are increasing exponentially. And, with nursing and things like that, I mean, there's a lot of different costs that could potentially impact the budget as we go into the next year. And we'll know more as we get into final budget development.
In terms of special education with the contracts, I think that we're currently using because of the difficulty and recruiting teachers, is there any kind of end of the road with that, or is that?
Geez, that's
I
a
know
great
that's a big question, but
Well, I don't know from our COVID paras, how many of them are moving into special education para positions that we had. I think that would be one way to reduce the paraeducator support contracts. But I think really the person to speak about that is Linda.
and I guess a question to that, just when we look at like decrease in spending, increase in revenue, would that make a big difference? I mean, are we, okay.
Yes, if we were able to fill all of our current teaching positions with district staff, it would be a cost savings for us. Right now, with the amount of teachers we have who are working with us through virtual contracts where we have to have a substitute there, if we were able to fill all of those positions next year, the cost savings would be about $550,000. So it is something that we're working with HR on to actively recruit. The reality is we are still all pulling from the very same small pool. So we are very hopeful that the recent teacher residency program that we started to establish in our work with St. Mary's will help to generate some additional interest in staff becoming teachers, including, as Dr. Kemp referenced, our paraeducator ranks as well. We have seen great success with paraeducators becoming teachers.
This is a bit of a long shot, but is there any support from county or state for them to provide those pools for us so that we're not going to a private vendor to?
As of now, there isn't, but I will tell you that some of the work that we're doing at the state SELPA level is in terms of developing priorities for the year, our legislative priorities and the priorities we're working on as the governor's budget works its way through the legislative process around pushing our partners at the state level, including CTC, around how they can support us and help us with providing some additional pools, or also thinking a little bit more creatively about how we add authorizations to credentials.
Thank you.
I have a question about the unfilled positions that were in, there was money left on the table, right, at the end of the year. So where primarily did that come from, do you think? Is it because we had so many unfilled positions that we didn't spend it? Or was that factored into what you did now? How did you determine what was going to be spent on people?
I'd say the money that came to the bottom line at the end of last year was probably more due to some of the, the departmental reductions that we're seeing as opposed to personnel costs. So I think personnel costs, we do shift when we are unable to fill positions between personnel and contractors. But I would say that more of those savings are probably realized at the departmental level or in site budgets where there are dollars that aren't spent, more on budgeted, probably more in supplies and services than in personnel.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other like alternative funding sources that we could be exploring with like community-based partnerships with sports leagues, things like that? Do we rent our facilities out when there's sports? I assume
We do, yes.
Is there any like, facilities rentals, especially after school hours, weekends, or do we feel like we've pretty much already tapped out all the local revenue streams for that?
Right, so really, really good question. I think we do a great job of renting out our facilities. We have a kind of a tiered system of how we charge different community groups to use the facilities. We have a partnership with a Sports Alliance, and their fees are like almost minimal. They do make a donation back to the district for the maintenance of our sports facilities. We have other people that rent out and pay full rental. It just depends on the user group. And we plan to bring information to the board regarding adjusting those facility fees in the near future. But ideally, our district facilities should cover our cost of renting those facilities. If there is wear and tear to the facilities, then we need to recoup that cost. We also have lease agreements with our childcare providers. And the childcare providers pay a lease amount that I would like to look more closely at in the next few years, because we want to make sure that the cost of those facilities, the replacement cost of those facilities, if they're a 25-year facility or a 30-year facility or a 40-year facility, that the rent that's set for that will be collected and then used to replace that facility when the time comes. And so we have, this is like one of those on the horizon projects that I'm going to be starting in the late spring and into the fall.
Excellent.
There is one thing though. So, some school districts have looked at surplus property and ways to use surplus property for opportunities to, let me give you an example. In San Jose, there's a school district that had extra property and they ground leased their property to somebody who came in and built a retail. I'm not saying we'll do this, but this is examples of what school districts do. Built a retail, or they built housing or something on the property. They ground lease it and they get a percentage of the revenue. So this is a way that's no work for the district to actually raise some capital, or school districts that have bought a business, like bought an office building and are using a portion of the office building for the district office and then leasing out offices there that would offset, any costs that they might have related to that. So there's a lot of creative ways for revenue for the school district.
And I'll just add that only in the last 2 years at superintendent's meetings, are we actually talking about how to become more entrepreneurial because there are no dollar sources that
Yeah.
are helping us? And so these ideas are all starting to percolate regarding things that we would have never considered and probably cause us a little bit of fear because it's not our area of expertise, and we're not necessarily suggesting we would go into any of them cavalier. But we're going to have to be outside the box
Yeah.
because the dollars are just not coming from the sources we have relied upon. And this is not just anything California, this is nationally now.
Yeah.
So,
Are there California-based restrictions on what you can and can't bring on? Like, I'm not suggesting we do this, but can you bring a Starbucks onto a high school campus or something like
No, you can't do that.
that? Okay, I assumed that there would be some sort of restriction on
Right.
there, so, but you can bring in and do these ground leases things where you
Right.
bifurcate part of this.
Yes, no, I wouldn't do it to a school. I
Oh,
think
oh, I see
that
what
you're talking, I'm talking about surplus property.
Property, okay,
Yes,
got it.
right.
Which we
Thank
don't have
Thank you
unless
for
we have
clarifying.
plans to
I mean,
to
the process for surplus property is very complicated if the school has been on the property. So if you wanted, from my experience, I've had to close a school before, and you do it because, you know, you're at a place where the enrollment is so low, it doesn't make sense to keep the school open any longer. And the cost of operating it really is, you know, the school might be in bad shape, the cost of repairs, you know, safety issues and so on. So when you do that, you have to create what's called a 7-Eleven committee, and it's not to go down and get a Slurpee. It's called 7-Eleven because there's 7 to 11 members.
Interesting.
Yes, and that committee then determines whether the property could be used for any other, well, they look at all the properties and they determine which of the properties then would be considered surplus because of declining enrollment and so on. So, yeah, that's a difficult process to go through, and I don't wish it upon anybody. But school districts have gotten in that situation where they've had to do this. And then based on that surplus property process, then they make a recommendation to the board to shutter the school. And you know, Oakland has been doing this. And even though the 7-Eleven committees made recommendations, that didn't mean always that the school would be closed, but it did declare the property surplus. And when a property is considered surplus, then there are rules about how you dispose of the property. And that then opens up a whole nother can of worms. That's really like, how do you sell it? How do you use the money? Like, once you sell it, the money has to go to a special fund that can only be used on facilities. Or if you decide just to ground lease it. Now, if you ground lease it, that's very different.
And is that because you've gotten taxpayer dollars to fund facilities, build things up, and so they can't just get diverted? Okay,
Yes.
makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for explaining.
So one of the areas that I talked to you about at one point, and I didn't get the opportunity to go to this particular conference because it conflicted with something else we were doing here, but grant writing. I think that's an area I would like to get more educated about it, because I think there is and I know they're trying to sell their services or whatever, but I think there is money out there that we could get. And it would obviously be, you know, quote unquote, one-time money, but it might work to help offset some of the things that we can't pay for.
Right.
So I don't know how we want to go about that. I know we're reducing personnel and not adding personnel, but it's an area where I think maybe we might be missing some funding that I don't know how much it would be, but it would be something to explore.
Yeah, Trustee Clark, I was actually thinking about that on the ride in this morning. And I was reminiscing about my time in another school district where we had a partnership with our education foundation, who helped us to procure the grant writer. And many of the grants that I've found in the past will grant a foundation, but they won't grant a school district. So if we could work with the Ed Fund to write the grant on behalf of the district, partner with us in that, then we might find that we have more eligibility for different grants that are out there.
and the other thing, because we have actually explored some, so for example, the grant we're getting for teacher residency. When you don't serve a large number of students with economic difficulty, you really need to be firmly planted in the innovative space. And the good news is that we are now being seen as planting ourselves in the innovative space. So for example, because we're involved in a national consortium related to AI. And then through that connection, we've been learning about those school districts that have gotten grants to move towards virtual reality, which is another whole career pathway that's emerging everywhere. We don't need to be actually serving students with economic challenge to be seen in those spaces. So we've already had the conversation regarding even some grant writers who take a portion of, and there's rules around all this, so I'm not going to go too far into it, except to say we're looking at ways to actually figure out how to do more of this now that we as a district are seen as very capable of embracing innovative pieces, because those grants tend to be where they want to see things piloted so that others can learn from them. So the money comes to us not because of the majority of grants, but because they would like us to be a bit of a demonstration or incubator and so forth. So this is all part of the discussion.
And we are in a position here in the Bay Area because my business is technology, and and AI is exploding that whole area of business. And since we're so close to Silicon Valley and our business has a lot of connections there, I think because we have that position now and where we are actually geographically, we could really maybe get some extra funding for whatever, or at least start to pursue it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's one of the missed opportunities if we don't look at that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And I know that you talked about, working on, maintaining or increasing, right, ADA. But how about maybe, also thinking about how we could, recruit, students, right? Like, because our enrollment's going down, but like our next door neighbor, actually, they don't have a declining enrollment problem. So I'm just wondering, how we could maybe as a school district attract
Right.
other students, maybe, and then also, a little bit separate, but in the past, we were looking at venture,
Yes.
our alternative school as maybe, also, a way to attract, right, different type of students who,
Right.
right, would benefit from our model.
Educational options. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. I think you make really good points. One of the areas that I have thought about, and I've even talked to Christine about this, it's really around our pathways at the high school and our CTE program. Don't even know this county well enough to know if there are, so is there any career and tech ed, like an ROP program in the county, where it might be in Mount Diablo, right? It is. Okay. Yeah. But we look at the pathways that are offered in Mount D and wonder whether there's anything maybe in the south part of the county that maybe is an opportunity for us to create a program that students might be interested to attend. It would at least offer more options for our students and then offset some cost, through an agreement. But yes, all of those. The one thing I don't know if the board knows about this, but school districts can, if let's say everybody wanted to come here, some school districts can actually deny inter-district transfers if it reaches a certain threshold. So we don't want to impact them too much. Yeah, yet. Just kidding.
Right.
Okay, so moving along, I want to just share some multi-year considerations for us to keep in mind. Obviously is enrollment and staffing according to the enrollment, attendance in the recoup plan, operational efficiencies. We'll still work on those things. We need to advocate to the state to raise the base. This is a message that I think all the suburban school districts need to work on together. And some of us,
We already are.
yeah, well, we just need to get louder.
That's not a new idea.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
going idea.
I think but it's really hitting home, I think, more now with we've always advocated for that. But I think one of the things that I was talking with a colleague in another district who shared with me that The state funding formula is really set up to benefit large urban districts and small school districts. And school districts like San Ramon Valley, without putting the words into the governor's mouth, but into the way it's designed, is that they expect that the local community takes care of the bridge. And that's a challenge is.
Because I think they honestly think that most school districts like San Ramon Valley are basic aid or community funded. And as the trend changes, more and more are becoming that. And so we become an even smaller, we are even less likely to hit it on the radar. But no, the last few years, like pre-COVID, there were conscientious organized efforts within PTA all over the state. Raise the Base was a major theme and a major campaign.
And the only thing I'll add to the raise the base conversation that I've been using lately, and I think it needs to be more explicitly done, because even within districts who want to raise the base, there's a broken front for this reason. Because there is such a large percentage of our dollars for salary and benefits, 85 or more%. And there are some simple data points that we need to use. Class size average, counseling ratios, and there's a few others I can name, where we simply, when you compare us, show that we are way below or way too high, depending upon what you're talking about. And so when I'm talking to elected officials and others, I simply say, we're not asking for the dollars that districts who deal with large socioeconomic challenges need. We're simply asking that our salary and benefits will allow us to hire enough staff so that our class size averages are in the middle, and that our ratios, when I say the middle, not so much the middle as in some should be lower, some should higher, but there should be a standard of what you expect your dollars should provide. And it's not about the community getting the class size average from 38 to 34, because we all know 38 isn't okay. Don't you believe, as a California standard, that you should be funding certain, not a lot, but certain very clear metrics? Class size, counselor ratios, and a few other things that I can think of. That's where I think the raise the base discussion can take it to a very precise level where you're actually letting the data speak. Because sometimes we say all the time, let the data speak, and ours speaks. And there are a few other districts where it speaks, but there are others where they could use more dollars, but it's not to the same extreme. And so that's what I'm hoping that the discussion shifts into. And I know Lisa Gross is working on this with the legislative group, and there's others.
Well, and for a long time, there was a discussion around what is adequacy? What is like, along with here's your base funding, but what's expected with that base, right? And it should be related to class sizes and counseling ratios and administrator ratios probably too. And MTSS support things too. So I mean, all of that.
Right. Instead, they think this, I'm sorry, they
No,
think
go
this
ahead.
belongs in supplemental concentration, which we don't get.
And then that would assume that only kids in certain situations have educational needs. And we know that that's not true.
Correct.
I think what's also difficult about it is that there's a lot of new legislators, and also some of the legislators that are there, it seems like, don't understand how education works. And so it's this constant having to like re-educate them on our needs, and sometimes it feels like they don't get it at all. And then as we get new legislators and they don't have experience, I mean, the ones that have brought forth bills that were meaningful were former school board members, because they get it. They understand how it works and why we need what we need. So I think there's a learning curve there also that we kind of come up against.
And it even comes up though among school board members that become elected officials. They know their kind of school district, and looking at the variation between small and elementary versus unified, or elementary, high school versus unified, all those different packages. The issues are so varied. And until you put yourself in the perspective of, okay, how does this legislation fit that kind of school district? You really don't know all the unintended consequences when they put out things like the ADA thing. Yeah, let's fund it enrollment. Oh, but you have to put 50% of your money into ADA counseling. Well, if you don't need
Maybe you don't
very
need
much
it.
ADA counseling, okay, are you better off with the old way to do it, you know?
Right. We don't want to move back into the categorical world again.
Exactly.
So I think the other last two items is, just being strategic about our one-time funds and making sure that what we're spending our money on is getting the results that we would like as a school district. And so Christine does a great job with her department looking at that. So, I think the next steps really for the board are we're going to develop 24-25 budget with our proposed reductions. We will consider other cuts and revenues. We're going to continue to work on that. We do want your feedback on community outreach and some discussion regarding items to bring back when funding is restored. So I will happily move back and forth to whichever slide you would like to look at.
It doesn't sound like any of these proposed reductions do anything to current class size, except maybe that we'd be staffing closer to, well, we already are staffing close to contract, but just that would be something that would become even more important. But that, can we, just for the sake of the audience, if we have a virtual audience,
Yes.
talk about what our staffing ratios are at the different levels? I mean, do we know those off the top of our heads? I know I didn't ask that question in advance, but
So
like the
yes.
24 to versus
Yeah, yeah.
26 and.
So TK is 20-1. K through 3 is 24-1.
But it has
You're
an
going to-
exception in it.
With
about-
exception, right. Yeah, we have some ability to go over that, but there's an average, there's the average. And quite frankly, I'm sorry, but I don't know what the other ones are. I know they're loads in the middle school and they're
there's
loads in the
28,
high school.
29,
28, 29, and then in the high school, it's based on student contacts.
and the 28 is high school and the 29 is middle school, right? I think that's right, because
Evan
it
knows
used to
this.
be 30 and 29.
Yeah. Yes.
And that has to do with the 7 period versus the 6
Right,
periods.
yes.
It's not really any different than just how many classes kids take,
Yes.
those grade levels. Because I think that's an important talking point, that we're not changing any of those. That's not what we're saying. It's just kind of probably running that 24 versus 26, but average of 24 thing
Right.
tight.
So that would be a good talking point with our families, is to let them know we're not adjusting class sizes in any of this. All of this is being done outside of the adjustment.
In
Make
terms
sure
of
Alana got that.
community engagement, I'm sorry, go first.
I don't-
Was somebody else talking? I heard somebody talking.
No, that was me. I'm sorry. I just said to make sure Alana gets.
Something
this
else I think that's really important related to community outreach, and this is for staff too, is I think even if it's doing a video, Evan at the whiteboard talking about the stuff you had in the beginning slides and actually where it's like a whiteboard where you're doing the math problem, because I really think everyone needs to understand the way the 3-year average affects things, the way the declining enrollment, and then the emphasis on talking in terms of people, like we talked about students rather than percentages, and then dollars, because it sounds like it's going to be a rough couple of years. And so for everyone to start off with an understanding is going to be really important.
Okay, thank you.
I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there, or no understanding about our budget process or how it works. And I think if we can find a way to creatively inform our community about that, it's going to be very, very important. I think it was important anyway, but as Rachel said, in the next couple of years, it's going to be more important for them to understand what it is that we're up against and how we're choosing to deal with it, and to be able to get input from the community. Super important right now.
And then I think even a part 2, talking about class size and how that works, and how the 7th period fits into that. And also how secondary buying down sections. Because the sections add a lot, but they're pretty small related to the overall way classes are funded. And so I mean, these could be several different videos, but I think it would really help all parents, but especially the parents involved in seriously raising the money, to understand it too.
Okay,
There are still people out there that think that we're funded as a rural district.
I know.
And I just, yeah, Dr. Loy and I heard it last week. So I'm just wow, okay. So then we were able to say, no, this is the way it is, but that was a teacher. So yeah, so
Old
educating
simple
needs to be
analogies
done.
are really I mean, we were never a rural district. It was just someone used that understanding to try to explain how the revenue limits were what they were, and then all that's gone. 'cause
Well,
of
it's
LCFF.
stuck.
Yeah, I
It's
know,
stuck
it
to this
is.
day, even after LCFF. And so
You hear it everywhere.
that's why when I came into office, I was like, we need to find a way to explain to people how we're funded in our budget. And I know everybody doesn't not look at every email or watch every video or whatever, but I think we still need to make the attempt. And if we can do it in snippets, maybe, so it's not this big long thing that they have to sit through, it would be helpful. At least
Absolutely.
we would have tried, right?
Right.
And in our process of talking about state funding, right, it gets lost that your property taxes are still funding your schools. It's just the
Yes. Right.
state is saying, and we'll give you the rest of what we say is owed, right? But, you know, you start down the state funding path and then people are like, how come my property taxes don't fund our schools? Well, actually they do, but you know, it's complicated to draw the picture.
Well, and to the point of kind of digestible outreach, you know, just having little, even using social media to just have little factoids. You know, this is budget fact of the week, you know, and then just a simple one sentence with a graphic, just so that it's piecemeal, so that people can kind of start to understand it, but then also create some momentum behind it. So.
Okay. Love these ideas. People are getting them written down, so we're going to work on this. This will be our spring campaign. All right, so we wanted to just ask what process you would like to discuss about how we're going to bring things back. If money, if like all of a sudden we get a windfall, what do we want to do? Do we want to look at some prioritization on this list here to discuss the restricted and the unrestricted lists that we have? What would you guys hope that we would bring back if we had a windfall? And you never know, the $80 billion budget deficit was actually a bad dream.
Yeah, well, it's not. But for me, the liaisons have been so valuable in our schools. If it were possible that we would be able to bring them back, that would, or some sort of support, whatever that looks like, that would be a priority to me.
Okay.
And hopefully that would bring support to our principals and our students in each of those sites.
I would agree with that, because I think the approach that you're taking with assistant principal help for the principals that don't already have an assistant principal is important, and assuming they would take on some of the MTSS roles. But for the schools that already have assistant principals doing support for IEPs and all the things that they're already assigning, to now say, oh, and now you're going to make up for the halftime MTSS liaison too, is just, you know, creating additional burden. So I would agree with Shelley that I think, and it could be that as you learn to live without it, you learn better ways to do it. So I think along with the direction of bring that back, it's not like, oh, that's on the bring back. It's just that function needs to be taken care of, because you might come up with better ways to do it.
Right.
Right. And related to that, right, the support relates to MTSS liaisons, but also like the elementary counselors. That's gonna be moved, right, from, yeah.
Yeah, shifting it over into restricted, so dollars for the next year.
Because I think we initially thought of the MTS liaisons as a way to jumpstart getting this whole thing going, when we're seeing that, you know, it's invaluable. But there's also the work that gets done to do the interventions. And I don't personally have a very good understanding about where is that all being funded. I would imagine some of it is coming through site generated funds and some of it through Title I and from other things. But again, getting back to that equity for all schools, you know, the liaisons are a big piece of it, but it's also the work that then stems from the liaisons work, which is maybe even more critical.
You know, one of the things that I've seen school districts do is assign staffing levels for support positions like this based on academic needs at the school. So if you have a school, for example, that has a large population of English learners and they're struggling with the reclassification rates, we put more supports there at that particular school site to build staff capacity and help to create a better system. Then once everything's in place, you step back the support a little bit, monitor to see whether you need to push in a little bit more. So it's almost, very similar to any other kind of change model.
Yeah, well, and making it more targeted. So,
Yes.
so as we potentially, if we can bring it back in a strategic way now that we know what we know, so that we can look at whether it's CASP testing or a healthy, whatever it is. These are the school sites at this moment in time that need a little extra support. And
Right.
then once they get over the hump, then what's the next level that
Right.
needs, that type of thing. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I agree too, that's kind of number one for me. And then one of the things is, just as we've been talking about this list, that textbook adoptions just doesn't, it's kind of sitting a little off with me, it's like I totally understand the pause, the slowdown at this point because of the tightness with the budget, but I would hate for that to get lost, and then that can continue to be kicked down the road as we add other new great ideas, and we're still, our students are still looking at books that that aren't history books, that aren't diversified, or, those
Right.
types of things.
So I'm going to offer an additional thought. We in school districts have been struggling to pay for two worlds. You're actually looking at a superintendent who struggles with textbooks because of how obsolete they are the moment they're published. So I think what we need to be committed to is ensuring resources that are current, diverse, and effective, but we might need to break the paradigm of the textbook. And the reason I say that is because the California cultural context, having come from a different jurisdiction, and I know from across the country, is much more, because of our laws, connected to textbooks and textbook adoptions than other districts have been for decades. And so I offer that as a suggestion to consider, that the goal should be access to effective resources. And I hear you, because we are attached to textbooks and some of those textbooks are not where they need to be. We probably have to break some of the paradigms as well, because we will never be able to afford the paper-based world and the digital world, even though I'm a firm believer that some of our resources need to be paper-based. So I just offer that as a consideration to consider. And I would suggest that an interruption to how we do adoptions, and again, this is not saying anything about the brilliant people like Debbie who lead them, is not a bad thing for us to rethink some of the ways in which we hold tightly. One other comment, and I've said this in almost every school visit, and some of you have heard me. Some of the most amazing teachers I've ever seen think they need to be attached to textbooks more than I've ever seen. And I've asked them, why do you believe you can't do what you do without that? And that's part of this cultural norm that I was not connected to when I came 4 years ago and had to learn it. So I'm not disrespecting it, but I'm just offering that there's some other ways to approach this. But I think as a board, you should hold the expectation that our kids have access to effective resources, whether they be in textbooks or not.
Right. And I would say that this is kind of that opportunity to kind of shift things a little bit. And so instead of having it listed as textbook adoption, maybe it is curriculum adoption. Maybe it's just removing that niche word and making it more of a broad word. And then we can kind of, as we're slowing down, and then when we ramp back up again, when there's the windfall, we can look at it more curriculum rather than textbook.
Excellent.
Did you mean specifically textbooks, or did you mean curriculum as trustee Brett's describing it?
Christine.
I would say we were speaking to textbook
Specifically
adoptions
textbooks.
in this case. Now, that being said, that's exactly the conversation around the redundancy and the free materials and the things that are beginning that conversation for us to look to see if there's options there so that we don't have to go straight to a purchase. But yes, we were speaking about specific adoptions to curriculum adoptions, AKA textbooks.
Yeah, many school districts, at least in one of my previous counties, moved to develop their own curriculum guides, and they braided together some portions of adoptions, like with CKLA, I think they adopted like just the phonics piece, and then they adopted something from another vendor because they looked at a whole bunch of different materials and they said, well, we like this one over here and we like that over there. And instead of purchasing one program, they carved together what was best for the district and for the students they were serving. And I think that's like one of the things we need to think about is how are we creatively putting together the curriculum adoptions that best serve the students, that includes the depth and the complexity around the deep learning work that we're doing. So yeah, Christine's working on that. Right, so I heard liaison model
Well,
and then curriculum.
I would ask a question back of which one of these cuts do you think is gonna be the easiest? Yeah, or least difficult?
The top one and the traveling conferences, I think, as well. There's some other ones that have some implications, but I think we can backfill it with, like, I don't love the fact that professional development is up there under ed services, because I think that, you know, if you want to improve outcomes for students, especially when you're transforming, you have to invest in the building the capacity, the knowledge capacity of staff. I think the duplication one, we'll have to wait and see on that. I think they're all doable. You know, making sure we have enough devices for replacement cycle. We're communicating out like the expectations for students. Our middle school students don't take good care of their computers, no surprise. And they got brand new devices, and in less than a month later, we were getting broken devices back. Like how?
Like
Why?
what kind of scale?
Yeah, the scale of the replacements in the middle school.
Last year, we had state testing like we always do with the same devices in April, May. And then in June had an influx, and that was to the tune of $250,000 that we had to go back to Evan and Stella and ask for money for launching the school year appropriately. And then that also impacted fifth grade because fifth grade had a delay in having their one-to-one devices. Much of that happened with, it was a stunt. We kind of learned later on that students were trending on.
And I think that's just like, if I can make a metaphor comment, just like attendance, where we have to really do a campaign.
Mhm.
I think that having come from a much larger district in very different conditions where we had significant one-to-one, we actually trend higher in terms of broken equipment than I've experienced. And I don't mean to be critical, except to say it means calling our parents to assist us, working with our kids to be responsible because they're amazing, and just calling attention to something that when I saw the data, I said, no, we're not going to accept this. This is not where we have to change course. We actually have to educate, because this is not what districts across this land and beyond are experiencing as it relates to care for technological devices. So I think it's just a question of helping our community partner with us to be sure that we are being good stewards.
And implementing the responsible use policy will be really important. We don't have that right now. So they get a device and there's no accountability for the student to take care of what's issued to them. So we're going to work on it.
We used to have something that they had to sign that had all the, you know, parameters on it, basically, or guidance. When we did the BYOD to start with, we had something that they signed when we started giving out Chromebooks.
Right.
I don't know what happened to
We
that.
still have that and we're just revising it and it's part of enrollment.
Mhm.
So what we'd like to do, and I've been having some conversations with middle school administration, is if we're going to be giving a device in sixth grade, onboarding with a more strategic plan with here's your new device and doing the agreement, because I think it's getting hidden in the enrollment process. That's the feedback I've gotten, that parents are enrolling and so we want to make it more a systemic conversation at the beginning and throughout the school year.
Yeah, it was done during registration when they're running around with 5, 10 other things. They're giving checks and yeah, that's probably a really good idea to kind of.
So kind of like a systemic and explicit discussion that
Right,
happens
on
in
its
the
own.
first day of school. Roles
Or-
and responsibilities kind of meeting, right?
Right, and actually, we're gonna see how creative and how much we can do with our resources, but when they get their device, can we spend some time with them, onboarding them with the proper conversation?
No, that would be a great opportunity to help them learn life skills, right? Responsibility, how to take care.
Can I,
Go ahead.
can I ask, is there like a sixth grade, is that maybe not the right age? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out. Is there a tipping point of maybe it's the seventh graders? Maybe we see a drastic difference in repair needs once they get into seventh grade, and maybe sixth grade is a different model?
I don't have the specific numbers. I believe it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
Which is kind of why we shifted that plan for device management in that
Yeah.
way.
Because it's a transition time anyway.
Mhm.
I have one more question about textbooks. So at one point, we were looking at how many textbooks we would get digitally, basically, right? Or paper. So where are we in that? How much of our textbooks are digital and how much are paper, and the cost difference between the two? What,
I'm going to let Deb speak to that because it does depend upon the publisher and what they offer. And more than often than not, I believe the digital piece comes as just part of the larger purchase price, but I'm going to let Deb, who's done deep research around this, kind of speak to that.
Thank you, Christine, but you're exactly right. First of all, once we got one-to-one devices, having digital access to textbooks was allowed per the Williams Act, right? Because of course we have an obligation to support each and every student in having a textbook for their academic classes and world language. With that being said, every publisher is a little bit different in terms of price structure. All of our new adoptions, we do have an electronic version of the book. However, the publishers have gotten fairly savvy and there's not that much of a cost difference now, number one. And oftentimes the digital is a PDF that is not necessarily, does not necessarily have up-to-date information. It's not like they update it each year as new events occur around the world, for example. And so they've gotten pretty savvy in terms of that. So it doesn't save us as much as we had anticipated.
well, that's unfortunate.
And really just to kind of emphasize something Deb says, when it's a PDF, it's just an electronic version of a static textbook.
Right. I mean, the same as the book. They don't update the books either, so.
Which is why the new world has to come soon.
Who's gonna start the SaaS company for software as a service for textbooks? Big idea.
That was the idea that Pearson had when they created the Common Core system of courses, but unfortunately that didn't, was not successful. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think
there
we've
any-
gotten your direction.
Okay, yeah, we're not taking action on this.
No.
Anyone have
Just gonna
anything else?
Add that I really appreciate technology's thought process in their plan, because initially you're like, what, take away the one-to-one, but it sounds like they really thought through the pieces of it, so thank you.
Yeah, that's like roughly 25% of the cuts.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you. I know that this was a lot of work and a lot of soul searching too, right? To kind of scrape the bottom and, as John says, squeeze out the towel. So we appreciate, I think, everything.
And if I may, I appreciate that last comment because I do not want the message to be that as the world's galloping in a certain direction, we're actually stepping away from technology. We're not. We're just creating the plan differently than it was before so that we can actually afford it better. I don't want anyone in their community to think we're actually going.
No, I was complimenting it because I think it's about being efficient. You're saying these are gonna last longer, and actually how the little ones are using them, this makes more sense. That's stewardship of resources.
That's why I love that you raised it, because my worry when we have slides like this without the conversation, we should talk talked about this, is someone's gonna think, oh my gosh, we're moving in the wrong direction, when in essence, we are not. We're just using the dollars differently.
I just want to take a second to check for public comment. I don't believe we have anyone. Okay. So I think we're gonna close this meeting. We'll take a 5-minute recess and then we'll come back for